because the lockdowns seem to me, so I kind of give you my take. When I think of like a fascist dystopia, I think about things like checkpoints, state mandated garments, state removing media, independent media, in order to have state messaging. I think of those types of things. And those were all the things that I saw during the lockdowns from the side of the leftist progressive and the feminist side. And they all seem to be in pretty good unison there. And it seems like all that did was limit choice. And so I wonder if there's not a contradiction in your worldview where at the same time you love feminism because it expands choice, but at the same time supported lockdowns, which definitely limited them.
I think that if we are going to, consider something being good on the basis of creating the most amount of good possible, I think that...
You mean the most amount of best outcomes possible?
Yes, yes.
Most amount of best outcomes.
Possible outcomes.
Okay.
I do believe that for a specific period of time, it was necessary to have everyone, including government officials, do their best to not spread COVID-19 until we could mitigate the dangers.
Okay.
I think that in some cases, I understand that many people grew very frustrated very quickly after some time, but I do think that in cases of emergency, when it comes down to freedom of choice, we should have freedom of choice, unless you are making decisions that would inhibit the freedom of choice that others have.
Isn't that a paradox?
How so?
So isn't this kind of the idea of the paradox of tolerance? We should tolerate everything except intolerance. Everyone has the freedom of choice except to inflict some type of damage on other people's choices. Isn't it kind of paradoxical? So in other words, I guess the thing that's interesting about this view is that you're telling me that limiting choice is necessary for good outcomes.
I think in very, very, very extreme circumstances, such as a plague.
Well, that's not a plague, right? It's just a virus.
It's a virus,
Yeah.
but a lot of people were dying.
Very few people total were dying, right?
Well, it was pretty freaky.
Yeah, it was mostly like fat people and really old people who were dying.
I think that even fat people and old people, I would prefer them to not die from viruses if possible.
So how much freedom of mind can you take in order to make sure that that fatty gets to live? How much of my freedom do you get to take to do that? How much of my freedom to walk into a store without wearing my government-sponsored, mandated garment around my face that marks me as acceptable? Does that sound like freedom to you? Or does that sound like some other kind of ism that you guys would normally call it?
I think that if there is an insane infectious disease that, doctors and scientists and professionals don't necessarily understand at the time raging around, I would say that you possibly infecting those around you and putting their lives at risk is, I do think, a time in which, freedom of choice should unfortunately be limited. For instance, it's like when someone is checked for weapons, like that is technically removing a freedom of choice if we don't allow someone to enter a building with weapons. But it's good because if they have weapons, they could use it to permanently eliminate someone's freedom of choice.
Yeah, but I guess this is what's interesting to me is that this is your view. Your view is that feminism is good because it expands choice, right? And then in the same breath, you say the COVID-19 lockdowns are good because they limit choice. And so it just seems like limiting choice to you is fine as long as it proves or provides for good outcomes.
Well,
as long as there's good outcomes, we can limit choice.
My rebuttal to that would be the COVID lockdowns were temporary emergency measures. When I talk about feminism giving people freedom of choice, there was a time in this country where women's career options were limited. had limited rights and freedoms, and now they do not. So,
Well, why would that matter if the outcomes were better? Because what you're saying to me, what you just got done saying to me is that you're fine with limiting choice as long as it's for the greater good and the outcomes, from your view, are better. The outcomes.
temporarily.
Well,
A
well, if
very
that virus,
temporary
what,
limiting of freedom of choice.
so what if that virus had been here for 50 years? Would you have still supported lockdowns if the state officials and experts came out and said that that was still the best way to mitigate the spread of this virus?
I think after 50 years, with all of the technology that we have, if they had not managed to get
But if
under
they
control.
did, would you have supported their mandate for new normal?
No, that's ridiculous.
Why?
'Cause
Like-
it's 50 years. That's a lifetime of limited freedom.
But a year and a half where people can't see their loved ones, or loved ones die, they can't even go to the hospital to see them, and when they can't have any contact with them whatsoever, right? They can't even touch them. People couldn't get medical care for years. They were dying of diabetes and other horrible things because of these lockdowns. You were fine with those things as long as you thought that the greater good was served as far as outcomes go.
My great-grandmother passed during the COVID-19 lockdowns in 2020, and my family was able to go see her as she was dying.
That's nice for your family,
Yeah.
but you know that there's many families who were not, depending on the states that they were in, or they would have a contact order where only one person could go in.
That's how
And,
they did it. It was one person
yeah.
at a time, which is frankly not ideal, but I think
It's not only not
especially-
ideal, but you couldn't touch them. They had plastic between you and the person often. Yeah. Depending on the state you were in, they would wall you off with plastic so that you couldn't touch them because of the threat of the contact of the virus. And so the thing is like, that doesn't sound like this freedom of choice society that was designed to assist people. And if you say, well, it's just a temporary measure, we'll just limit your choices temporarily. We don't know what temporarily is. That lasted almost 2 years. Like,
It was a year and a half, so that was fairly temporary.
it's not that temporary, and the amount of damage that it did was incredible. And if another one comes, you'll do it again. And if another one came, you do it again. And if
do
another
not
one came, you
think
do it
that
again.
Given the unpopularity of the lockdowns and the politicization of the lockdowns, I don't think politicians would want to force another lockdown. I also think that
But you support them, though. Whether the politician does or not, you support them for the greater good. The idea is that it serves the greater good to you. And I guess that's my position, too. See, I think that limiting choice can serve the greater good just like you do. I think that limiting choice in many instances serves the greater good. And I think that limiting choice for a lot of people, like I think that limiting women's choices to have abortions, I think that that's good. I think that provides better outcomes for society. I think that limiting women's ability to vote men into wars, I think that that's good for society. Like I think the same thing you think. If we're going with good as outcomes, I think that limiting choice is sometimes necessary for the greater good, just like you do.
So I want to address what you said about war. I assume you're referring to the draft.
No,
Vote men into wars. What do you mean?
that's only one aspect. Well, I'll explain.
Okay.
Do you agree with me that no matter what the circumstances are, it's almost exclusively going to be men who engage in all frontline combat operations in basically any nation on planet Earth?
I think that has historically almost always been the case, with some exceptions. But in this day and age, I do think that boots on the ground is significantly less common.
Like in the Ukraine?
Oh, well, Ukraine's a different beast. We're talking about America.
Yeah, well,
And Ukraine also had women. The women volunteered to fight for Ukraine.
they're not in frontline combat roles. In fact, they were allowed to leave, and the men weren't allowed to leave. The men had to stay, and they were drafted right off the street.
Well, that's terrible. I don't think anyone should be forced to go to war. However, it's
But they
also
are.
a specific age range of men. I think that when we're talking about war,
Hang on, it's up to 60. They're drafting them up to 60 years
That's
old.
gnarly.
But it's common. That's common in a real war. We just haven't seen one in a long
Of course.
time.
But when I think about war, I don't think about women voting.
Do you
to
mind
send
if we look
men
that
to
up?
war.
Can you look up the max draft age for Ukraine, Brian?
Yeah, Mary, can you look that up?
I believe that it was up to 60 or even higher.
Well, that's horrible. I myself am very anti-war, and I'm very anti-draft. I don't think that anyone should be forced to lay down their life.
But don't you agree with me, though, that it will be the case that if there is warfare in a nation, that it is going to be men who are going to be almost exclusively doing all of the heavy lifting for all frontline combat?
I have the answer if
Okay.
you'd like. So there's a bit of detail on it, but hide that, Mary. The maximum draft age for men in Ukraine is 25, though this age was 27 before April 2024. However, after completing their initial service, men become part of the reserve and can be recalled for mobilization until they reach 55 or 60 for officers.